Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining Ranger 4's webcast, How DevOps Drives Down Technical Debt. I'm Priyanka Jain, and I'll be your host today. And here to facilitate the discussion is Helen Beale and Daniel Breston. As mentioned earlier, please write any questions you may have in the chat box or use the question function in your GoToWebinar control panel, and they'll be answered at the end. I'll now pass it over to Helen and Daniel.
Great, thanks Priyanka. As Priyanka said, my name is Helen Beale. I'm the DevOps Director here at Range 4. And today I am joined by Daniel Breston, and we're talking about how DevOps drives down technical debt. So this is us. We're in the unusual situation today of being actually sat together in an office rather than in remote locations. So this is going to be a fun chat. Say hi, Daniel.
Hi, Daniel.
Thank you. So we thought we'd start by having a think about what technical debt is and why we're talking about it. So for me, technical debt is taking shortcuts early on that then cost more money later to fix and unpick problems that have been kind of woven into maybe some software that's been developed. What about you? I know you come from a slightly different angle from me often, or from the ops side.
I think that technical debt is when you make a decision based on a particular type of technology and you don't quickly enough determine when you need to pivot and look at something else. And so you get stuck in long contracts or you get stuck in long services arrangements or something like that, and that doesn't allow you to quickly adopt and adapt new things that come along, and that's your technical debt. The other thing is that you never have a plan to get rid of it. You don't have an actively managed plan to get rid of it. So that's my opinion.
Okay. You remember who this chap is?
Nope. Go ahead.
I thought you recognised him from last time. No? Okay, so this is the Wikipedia entry on technical debt, also known as design debt or code debt. A metaphor referring to the eventual consequences of any system design, software architecture, or software development within a code base. This is your favourite cartoon. I'll gladly pay you Tuesday for a hamburger today.
In this, him I recognize. To me, this picture typifies technical debt, because we keep saying we'll get rid of it later, and we never get rid of it later. You know, pay us now, we'll go do something, and we'll deal with it at some point in the future. And one of the CIOs we were talking to the other day was saying, we need to get to the mentality that whatever we install today is tomorrow's technical debt. How are we going to deal with this? Because that's now our legacy.
So we looked at this, you and I have discussed this a few times now, and I think the bit I always find really striking is that architecture choice has so many more people answering that as a potential perception or a cause of technical debt. I mean, why is that the leading answer, do you think?
I think because people are looking at technical debt as being architecture driven and don't look at services, aren't looking at code, aren't looking at how they test or the processes that they have and how technology is matching the business. They're only looking at technical debt from an infrastructure perspective instead of the whole value chain.
Okay. What other ones in there particularly jump out at you? I mean, I find the requirements shortfall one quite interesting, because we spend such an enormous amount of our time when we're talking about DevOps about helping people getting their requirements and ideation process straight.
The two that jumped out at me was cost pressure and limited knowledge.
They're quite low answers there.
And cost pressure, because cost pressure typically forces me to make decisions I don't want to make, which drives up my debt. And limited knowledge in that I'm not keeping up with what's happening, and therefore I'm not able to take advantage of new stuff, which would help me avoid debt or at least help drive down technical debt. So I think those two should be higher.
And you haven't picked out your favorite measurement. You surprised me.
Yeah, I think measurement goes along the whole y-axis. is how do you measure awareness and time pressure and interest requirements and all the rest that's on here? Because if you're not doing that, if you're not thinking about what's important and creating key indicators of performance that are key, then you're always going to end up with some type of debt. You know, if I don't know what's important to me and I go and make a decision in my personal life, that's going to cost me money.
And there's a lot of these, I mean, are things that seem that you could have avoided them, like the one you've described in inadequate testing. But one that turns out to me that I kind of question is legacy modernization. Because if the time that you implemented that solution, that was all that was available, is that really technical debt, or is that just a fact of life?
Yeah, it would be interesting to understand the difference between people's architecture choice and legacy modernization. Modernization now is happening so fast that you can't keep. It's difficult to keep up, but you can, if you're at least aware, which is the limited knowledge, you can start to take advantage, and that can at least help you maintain your debt, if not start to drive it down over time.
And we do have lots of customers who are tackling legacy kind of monolithic systems that they can't really iterate on effectively, and they're trying to re-architect around the edges to make things easier to kind of create velocity with it in cogs, if you like, in it.
And I think that goes back to, you know, thinking about minimum viable services, minimum viable products, looking at open source, not getting into 5-year contracts. All those things will help you not get into long-term legacy decisions.
So I think we've touched on this a fair amount already, but I think there is a perception in the industry that technical debt is something that happens in software and it's something that developers cause. I think we have a wider view than that, do we not?
Well, from an operations perspective, I fully think it's all the developers' fault.
I didn't say it was their fault. I said, who's it a problem for?
Well, technical debt is a business problem.
Mm.
It's not an IT problem. It's a business problem. And if the business isn't willing to take care of technical debt, they're going to start wasting money. And when they start wasting money, they start introducing shadow IT. And when they start introducing shadow IT and things become ungoverned, they're now wasting more money. And no one looks at that as a form of debt.
Is shadow IT ever a good idea?
Oh, absolutely. I just don't call it shadow IT then, because if you've approved the capability of individuals to do something, it's now part of your own IT. So I wouldn't call it shadow IT then. I would call it more of a, you know, we're now working with the business to enable technology to solve a business process problem, obstacle, goal.
Okay. So we were talking about this and trying to understand the different types of technical debt that we see and specific examples that we've seen in our customers. And obviously we're not going to name any names because it's a little unfair to wash people's dirty laundry in public. We talked about one which was about not configuring software correctly and not having templates and standards of use, and how that can slow down agile development sprints and have an impact on quality.
Yep.
You have more to say about that one?
Nope.
No. Okay. So another one, we touched on this one already actually. So this monolithic design and people architecting software originally with quite tightly coupled integrations. So not thinking about loosely coupled integrations or APIs and things, which makes it hard to develop iteratively in the future, restricting velocity.
And I do think that people need to start looking at the ideation to realization life cycle and stop thinking about that as new products and features and start thinking about that as everything is an idea and everything has to be realized. And what then is the best technology way forward? And that will help drive the way that you test, the way that you think, the way that you build and buy, the way that you code, your use of APIs, open source, everything else.
And this third one that we were looking at, is this around test and developers produce and change fast, can't really keep up, devs spending too much time on support fixes?
It goes back to what we've heard before, is that a defect is an improved incident. So why are you letting defects go live? Why are you approving incidents into your environment? I mean, I do realize there are times when you have a minimum viable product or some type of feature that needs to go live that is not optimal. But then what is your plan to resolve that in the next cycle or 2 cycles? And really make that a driving force of right first time. And at the same time, use that same philosophy to drive down mean time to respond, to recover, to repair, and resolve. So, use the 4 R's and right first time to help create those things that aren't going to let you get into a situation of, oops, we've gone and put this thing in now, and now it's too hard to take out.
Is this an endemic of putting too much stuff in the sprint as well, and maybe using WIP and Kanban will help kind of take that out of it?
I think so, and also it's the mentality of doing, big releases, big deployments, instead of little releases, little deployments.
Okay. And the fourth one we were talking about was around infrastructure as code, where organisations are migrating to cloud, and because they don't have a standard way of using their cloud platform tools, time is wasted on duplication. And loads of our customers, the majority of them have some kind of cloud strategy, whether some of them are building private cloud because the costs are really too high because they've got so much data to use a public cloud. Some have concerns over regulations, particularly local country regulations, and lots of them see huge benefits. Not normally so much around cost, but more about elasticity and kind of service levels. But a lot of them also recognise that this has huge potential for chaos. So how do we control or prevent the chaos that cloud can bring?
Well, cloud to me is stuff that I'm running a business service on. And if I define it like that, then it doesn't really matter to me whether it's in somebody else's data center or my data center, whether it's somebody else's kit or my kit. I need to manage that. I need to manage the fact that it's up and available and has the right capacity and has elasticity and predictability and availability. I need to be able to do that regardless of whether it's cloud stuff or my stuff. Cloud to me starts to become an issue with where's the data that I need to secure and manage. So I need to make sure that it's secured and managed properly. But to be honest, I need to make sure that my data is secured and managed no matter where it is. So hopefully that's part of my end-to-end design. And that takes cloud and makes it a business tool to make things better, faster, safer, instead of a technology tool to try to drive down cost, which cloud is never going to be fully if you use it only as from that attitude. And the other thing is it's very embarrassing, and infrastructure as code is interesting. I think it's a great thing, but you need to ramp it up and go environment as code. Infrastructure as code may have been really good 3 or 4 years ago. It's embarrassing when the CIO says it's going to take me 6 weeks to go and create this new environment, and it's going to take me this amount of money. And the head of marketing takes out his credit card, signs on to Amazon, builds an entire data center in about 3.5 minutes, and he goes, "Yeah, I'm done. Thank you very much." It makes it, that type of dichotomy in an organization is difficult. So you need to be able to validate what you're doing and why, and work on these things together with your vendors and with your customers.
So the key to avoiding cloud sprawl, essentially, then, is to have good governance?
Is to have good governance. So if you have a plan, it's no more than having, governance around your virtual servers.
Yeah. And then the final one that we wanted to talk about in this little section here was around when businesses are kind of sales-led or business-led, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, that their customers are pulling kind of requirements through their system. But if they're not testing properly, if they're not testing early enough or spending enough time testing, I mean, we call it, well, the opposite, fix then ship, when we're trying to get people to turn that around. But we see that quite regularly.
I think there's a lot of people that ship then fix. And I think people need to turn it around and do what you're suggesting, which is fix, then ship. And you should be able to do that if what you're trying to manage and create is small enough and the right people are on the team to go and create that product, up to and including the business customer if you can.
Because it's them that you're pushing this technical debt onto in this case, or
Yeah.
for your customer. We've had stories of banking software customers who spent 18 months fixing defects in an upgrade and have fixed in over 1,000 defects that have kind of come through in that release. So, yeah, that could definitely be improved. So, what are the consequences of technical debt?
I think the consequences of technical debt are the different types of waste and lean. I mean, you can use all of this stuff to say that your consequences of debt, you don't have the right skills, you're always waiting for something to happen, you've got too much inventory or not enough inventory, you create something larger than it's supposed to be, so you overproduce it, or you attach too much to it at the very beginning, so you're overprocessing. You are moving data all around the planet when it doesn't really need to be moved. I mean, there's all kinds of debt associated with the 8 types of waste. I think for me, the biggest consequence is the dissatisfaction to the customer.
Yeah.
You know, and that really impacts the cultural and organizational aspect of DevOps because it ends that collaboration and communication.
Yeah. When people are angry, they don't really want to talk, do they? And it's just it's self-perpetuating. And unhappy customers will be less customers, which will be inability to compete, which will be business dying.
Yeah, or your own internal customers go, yeah, don't even think about writing this business case. It ain't going to happen.
Yeah, and just don't let you do anything. You just run what you've got. You can stop innovating. So how does DevOps help then? So the first recommendation from the DevOps perspective is about embracing the marriage. And when we say the marriage, we're talking about what we refer to as the harmonious polygamous marriage of DevOps between Agile, Lean, and ITSM. So we think of DevOps as a natural evolution of the convergence of the maturity of these kind of work streams, if you like, or methodologies that people have been using. Daniel, would you like to expand upon that thinking?
IT service management gives me the basis and the foundation to have good IT practices. Agile provides me with the agility to take a request, even if it's a fix, and make it go live better, faster, and safer. And Lean allows me the governance perspective of continually improving what I'm doing and providing a way for management, top down, and then back up again, to align metrics of improvement, such as cost of delay, right first time, mean time to recover, repair, restore, such that everyone is now working together. So I love DevOps and its basis upon these 3 movements.
Excellent. I often I use an analogy a lot as well about people thinking about the wedding and not the marriage. So they're developers in particular thinking about kind of when they're going to release their code rather than what's going to happen with that code while it's doing its most important thing, which is living in the wild and delivering value back to the customer.
Yes.
So for those of you who don't know us, I tend to be a bit devy and Daniel tends to be a bit opposite. So when I say things like that, he'll often jump on it. It's the developer's fault. It's all their fault.
I don't think it's their fault.
Of course not, because we're DevOps now.
We're DevOps
we don't do
now.
that sort of thing.
That's right.
Yeah. So another big kind of mantra in the DevOps world is about shifting left, and we first started talking about shifting left in the concept of testing, so about testing earlier specifically, and there's many reports out there and examples that show us how testing earlier reduces the overall number of defects, reduces the cost and time spent fixing them, and of course you've got a much better quality product for your customer. You've almost certainly fixed then shipped, not shipped then fixed. But as time goes on, we talk about more and more kind of shifts left. So another one is non-functional requirements. So just before Danny and I on this call, he was explaining to one of our customers how little he likes the term non-functional requirements. I think his point is that they're clearly functional because they're an important part of the product, whereas I think the general semantics around it is that functional things do something specific for that application, and non-functional requirements are more generic kind of security, performance, stability things that ops expect. But we are in firm agreement that NFRs should definitely be included in the requirements gathering stages much earlier than they generally are. How can people do that?
I think people need to change the vocabulary. I think Agile and Lean and IT service management allow you to change the vocabulary of how you think. I mean, what is the definition of done? People look at a Kanban board or look at a Scrum board and they work from left to right. What happens if you went the other way? What if you started with the done column and moved to the column next to it and said, what does it take to get stuff from here to here? And if you start looking from the customer's perspective and let them pull the product through the life cycle, or pull the feature through the life cycle, or the technology change through the life cycle, instead of pushing it through, your words change. What you mean by done, release, deploy, test, what's required and what's not required completely changes focus when you start using philosophies like shift left. It allows you to see your constraints and allows you to see where your obstacles are to get that flow that you want, to reduce time to market and reduce cost of delay.
We like it, in summary. So we're kind of touching on the three ways now. So many of you on the call will have read The Phoenix Project by Gene Kim and George Stafford and Kevin Bear, the seminal novel about IT. We had a really interesting chat about it earlier on today, actually. So I think it was you, Daniel, first thing this morning that brought up that you'd been at a meeting or somewhere recently where people had actually wondered if we should still be talking about the Phoenix Project, given its age and perhaps that it's quite widely read now. But I definitely, we have one prospect that told us just this week that he thinks only 1 in 5 people in his IT organisation have heard the phrase DevOps. So that's not very many people there that have read the Phoenix Project.
The Phoenix Project, to me, and ITIL and COBIT and stuff like that are very good to lay down the foundation of adopting and adapting the way that you use technology in your organization to remove obstacles and achieve outcomes. I think what I'm opposed to is that people are looking at the Phoenix Project and taking it from being a novel and turning it into a standard. And that's where my issue is. If you're going to look at the Phoenix Project and go, yeah, there are things in here that I can learn that can help me adopt and adapt the way that I work, I'm fully in favor of reading the Phoenix Project because it's a great book for that, as is The Goal and several other books that are out on the market now. But what I'm opposed to is people that are looking at it and going, this is the way I now need to work, period. And that to me was never its intent.
No, and at the very core of it, it has these 3 ways. And for me, that's the most important lesson in that book, applying those 3 ways to other businesses. And everything else varies from business to business in terms of where they are on the maturity scale now and what their business why is and where they're going. So for those of you on the call not familiar with the 3 ways, the first way is about increasing flow. The second way is about amplifying feedback loops. So not just customer to requirements, but every feedback loop within that through the organisation. And then the third way is about experimentation and learning and continuous improvement. So with technical debt, Daniel, how does increasing flow help us avoid technical debt?
Well, if I increase flow, I'm not stuck into large changes. If I'm not stuck into large changes, then I'm not stuck with architectural decisions that I need to figure out how to unwind. If I get feedback quickly on what I'm using my technology for, then I can start to make decisions faster than most organizations currently are. And because of that, I can change the way that I get money to fund change. So rather than waiting for that annual budget, I can start to fund things in a 2-week cycle, just like I'm creating things in a 2-week cycle, as an example. And that now lends me into the third way of experimenting and improving that process from, okay, I can't do 2 weeks now, I'll do 6 weeks, and then I'll do 4 weeks, and then I'll do 2 weeks type of change. So it allows me and my teams to start thinking about what are they doing to do better, faster, safer, but it also gives me a way to communicate to the business, because everything that I'm doing now is from the business perspective. I think that was one of the major outcomes of the 3 ways was, if you're not doing it to remove an obstacle or achieve a goal, what are you doing?
Yeah. Stop doing it.
Yeah, stop doing it. That's yours.
This is a bit more me than you, though, isn't it? So, being holacratic, some of you on the call may be a bit like, what? So, holacracy is a movement that I've been reading about in the last year or so, and looking at how organisations we work with have aspects of it or are moving towards holacratic environments. So, that at its core, holacracy, and we've talked about the word and its origins quite a lot here, and we think it's a couple of things. One, kind of democratic, so being a bit flatter than the normal hierarchical organisation type that we see. And when I do presentations of organisational patterns, I have lots of traditional organisation charts with CIOs at the top and then dev managers and heads of ops and things. Holacracy's organisational charts look a lot more like a ecosystem or a holistic environment, which is where the hola bit comes from, or the whole bit comes from. So they look more like cells in a body, and this is one of the principles of holacracy, that an organisation is like a system itself. So parts of it are reliant on other parts, like cells are in the body, but my brain cells don't necessarily command and control everything else that's going on in my heart cells. Actually, my heart does a whole other different, very important job, as does my lungs and my liver. And this is kind of the principles behind holacracy. And it does lots of interesting things, like think about the people that are doing the work being sensors for the overall ecosystem. So my favourite example of an organisation that have really transformed themselves recently, that are very familiar to everybody in the UK, is Waterstones. They have kind of ripped out their standard ways of doing command and control. Instead of telling every store what to sell and how to sell it, they've allowed every store to feel and sense their local market and sell the books according to what their local readers are going to enjoy, and that's really turned around their fortunes. So that's really what holacracy is about at its core. It has very interesting principles around some of the stuff we've already talked about, so getting out of these annual budget cycles and getting into places where you can sense what budgets are needed and approve them and spend them accordingly. And I know this is frightening for some people. I wrote a blog last week called DevOps and All the Continuouses. You can find it on my LinkedIn profile. You'll see that one of our customers, Lindsay Smith, the CTO of Telrock, commented on it, saying, how scary he finds the idea of continuous funding to be. But what's the alternative? The alternative is annual budgeting for stuff that, in 12 months' time, how are you going to know what that customer wants?
I guess the question I asked was, you're asking me to do things in 2 to 4 week cycles, and you're giving me a budget that we kind of talked about in August, we approved in September. In January, you send me a memo that tells me I've overspent. In July, you tell me a budget I've really overspent. Who can I fire? And then in November, you send me another memo that says, okay, you've underspent, spent it all. And that just doesn't make sense. It doesn't match the cycle of change. So we need to match the cycle of change, and we need to turn change into a holistic process, which is what IT service management and Lean and Agile have always suggested, and put that right governance around such that you can think about continuously funding or continuously releasing and deploying in such a way that it makes sense for the organization.
I agree. So we've come to the end of our 30-minute webcast today. I think we have a few questions that have come through during the course of the webcast, which I think Priyanka's going to share with us now.
Yes, we do. So our first question is, by implementing DevOps, can we measure this against a business activity?
Measuring questions for Daniel.
So, say it again. Sorry.
By implementing DevOps, can we measure this against a business activity?
So DevOps is a way of using technology to manage, to enable a business activity. So you don't implement DevOps. DevOps is a cultural and collaborative and communicative movement between you and whoever is going to be using your technology in the best way to enable them to do something or to help them not to have a pain that they're having. And I think that's what you need to look at DevOps and stop thinking about it from the tools perspective and start thinking about it from the interactions and organization perspective and how technology can then help drive that.
Yes.
And our next question is, before any implementation occurs, in your experience, how have you proved the cost benefits long-term to the business?
I think
so. The best way is to show people what other people have done. So one of the things we talk about a lot with DevOps with our customers and how to implement cultural change is doing lots of showcasing. So experimenting, proving stuff, and then showcasing it. And if somebody's right at the start of their journey, they haven't got anything of their own that they've proven that they can showcase. So at that point, we have a raft of other customers, and there is a raft of documented evidence out on the internet. It gets very boring to read about Netflix and Google and Etsy and over again, but there are an increasing number of other, I hesitate to use the word normal, but and I also hate the word unicorns, but more businesses that have been around longer and have more heritage pre-internet that have common challenges. So at that point, before things start, we need to show people what other people have done, and we need to baseline where they are now so that as they move forward we can showcase the success. Once we've baselined somebody, we can start putting together investment estimates or investment return estimates.
Most technology decisions nowadays are built upon business cases of what will it cost, instead of business cases of what will it bring to the organization in terms of value. And because of that, when it's done, you don't ever go back, or you don't go back often enough to say, look at what we did, which then drives that next funding cycle. And if you were able to do that, if you're able to start saying, look at what we were able to do because we spent this, instead of look at what we spent,
yeah,
okay, that would drive the conversation differently.
And that's the ideation to realization feedback loop. So
yep.
Being able to measure not only the cost of getting a feature all the way through and out into delivery, but knowing what the actual impact of that specific feature has been on the business value.
Yep.
How it's, yeah. So, and I think that answers the next question as well.
Yeah. Is there a way to measure this? For example, presenting the benefits of a cultural and organizational change to the business.
So yeah, absolutely. It's getting those KPIs, or sorry, metrics that matter, clear at the start, baselining early, setting goals, and measuring frequently, and pivoting when needed, because it doesn't always go up.
Really look at your value streams, look at your value chains, get the right people into a room and ask them when was the last time they looked at something. I mean, we were working with a customer a couple of weeks ago where, you know, the managers who were supposed to be doing something on a very insignificant change had not sat down and really looked at everything that happened. And when they did that in one afternoon, they realized that it actually took almost a year in time with over 200 human touch points. And they hadn't thought about that, and they now realized why change was so difficult. And this was for something insignificant. And that motivated them to go back in and start looking at other things that they were doing. But we were forcing them to look at a business process and not look at a technology process. And that really drove that change.
Yeah, massively. Okay.
And lastly, we have a comment. A simple definition of technical debt is where something is almost done but not completely done, i.e. something is not production ready but almost ready in that sprint.
You see, I wouldn't call that technical debt personally. I'd call that something not done. Or,
I mean, obviously, if you're leaving things in your sprints that you're not going to address, that's going to drive up technical debt. So I agree with the purpose of this statement. I think you need to complete the story, though. You need to get it backed out to the business and what is the impact to the business.
yeah,
And then you have a full statement.
because you just could complete that and then it's not a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. And that's all for the questions. Thank you, Helen and Daniel, and thank you everyone for joining us. A follow-up email will be sent with today's slides and recordings. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks and goodbye.
Goodbye.